March 2019, Caribbean Sea. 3 Venezuelan Navy warships approaching a U.S. Coast Guard cutter conducting routine patrol. The Venezuelan ships were armed, anti-ship missiles, deck guns, torpedoes. The Coast Guard cutter, lightly armed, outgunned 3-1. Venezuelan commanders ordered aggressive maneuvers. Closing distance, radar lock. Weapons trained on the American vessel. Then one U.S. Navy destroyer appeared on the horizon, fired a single warning shot, not at the Venezuelan ships, into the water, 500 yards ahead of their bows. 3 Venezuelan warships immediately turned around, retreated to territorial waters, never returned. One shot, no casualties, no damage, just pure strategic dominance. This is a reconstructed scenario built from real U.S.-Venezuela tensions, standard Navy rules of engagement, and how these confrontations actually play out at sea. This is how discipline and control win without firing for effect. By 2019, U.S.-Venezuela tensions reached crisis levels. Economic sanctions crippled Venezuela's economy. Political turmoil threatened regime collapse. President Nicolás Maduro blamed the United States for Venezuela's problems. Venezuelan military forces grew increasingly aggressive toward American vessels operating near Venezuelan waters. Harassment, close encounters, dangerous maneuvers. Documented incidents throughout 2018 and early 2019. The Caribbean became a flashpoint. U.S. Coast Guard conducted counter-narcotics operations regularly, interdicting drug shipments from South America, perfectly legal under international law. Operations in international waters far from Venezuelan territory. But Venezuela didn't care about international law. They viewed U.S. presence as provocation, threat to sovereignty, justification for aggressive response. Venezuelan Navy deployed patrol vessels specifically to harass American ships, shadow them, create incidents, test American resolve. Multiple documented encounters following this pattern. March 2019. Tensions peaked. Venezuela accused the U.S. of planning military intervention. American officials denied it, but both sides positioned forces for potential confrontation. U.S. Coast Guard cutter operating 75 nautical miles north of Venezuelan coast, international waters, conducting routine counter-narcotics patrol, standard mission, nothing unusual. 3 Venezuelan Navy ships departed port. Almirante Brion, class patrol vessel. 2 Constitucion class patrol boats, all armed, all heading directly toward the American position. The Venezuelan ships weren't on routine patrol. They were hunting, looking for confrontation. This pattern matched previous documented harassment incidents. Venezuelan commanders thought they had the advantage. 3 ships against 1. Superior firepower, home waters, political backing from Caracas. They miscalculated badly. The Coast Guard cutter detected Venezuelan ships at 40 nautical miles. Radar contact, 3 surface vessels. Speed, 25 nautical mile per hour. Heading directly toward American position. The Coast Guard followed standard protocol. Transmitted on international maritime frequencies. Identified themselves. Stated their position in international waters. Requested Venezuelan ships' intentions. No response. Venezuelan ships maintained course and speed, closing distance. This matched the pattern from previous harassment incidents. At 20 nautical miles, Venezuelan ships increased speed to 30 nautical mile per hour. Aggressive approach. Not standard maritime behavior. Clear, hostile intent based on established rules of engagement criteria. The cutter transmitted again. Warned Venezuelan vessels they were approaching too close, requested they maintain safe distance per international maritime regulations. Still no response. Venezuelan ships continued closing. Aggressive posture escalating. At 10 nautical miles, Venezuelan ships activated fire control radars, locked onto the American vessel. Preparation for weapons engagement. Extremely aggressive action in international waters. This constitutes imminent threat under Navy rules of engagement. The Coast Guard commander faced impossible situation. His cutter carried one 5.7mm deck gun, small arms, against 3 Venezuelan warships with anti-ship missiles and heavy guns. If shooting started, the cutter would be overwhelmed in minutes. But Coast Guard cutters don't operate alone in contested waters, not during high-tension periods. Standard Navy doctrine positions supporting assets nearby. The commander transmitted emergency alert. Venezuelan Navy vessels demonstrating hostile intent. Fire control, radar lock, request immediate support. The response came within seconds, not from the Coast Guard, from the U.S. Navy. This is USS Detroit. We are 15 nautical miles south of your position. Preceding your location at flank speed. Stand by. Venezuelan commanders monitoring communications heard the message. USS Detroit, Freedom-class littoral combat ship, fast, heavily armed, and closing rapidly. But Venezuelan ships maintained course. Still approaching. Still locked with fire control radar. Either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. USS Detroit didn't come alone. USS McFall, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, appeared simultaneously from different bearings. The Venezuelans had focused on the Coast Guard cutter. Single target. Assumed they had numbers advantage. Didn't scan wider area thoroughly. Now they faced two U.S. Navy warships. USS Detroit with 5.7mm gun, rolling airframe missiles, and Hellfire missiles. USS McFall with 5-inch main gun, Tomahawk cruise missiles, SM-2 surface-to-air missiles, torpedoes, and close-in weapon systems. The firepower balance shifted instantly. 3 Venezuelan patrol boats versus 1 Coast Guard cutter and 2 Navy warships. Not even close. USS McFall transmitted on international frequencies, English and Spanish, following standard escalation protocols. Venezuelan Navy vessels. This is the United States Navy destroyer USS McFall. You are operating aggressively toward U.S. Coast Guard vessels in international waters. Stand down immediately. Disengage fire control radars. Maintain minimum 5 nautical mile separation. This is your only warning. Venezuelan ships finally responded. Not with words, with action. They increased speed, close to 5 nautical miles from the Coast Guard cutter, right at the line USS McFall specified. Testing, probing, seeing if Americans would actually respond with force. Bad decision. USS McFall's commanding officer faced a classic escalation dilemma governed by rules of engagement. Venezuelan ships hadn't fired weapons, hadn't crossed into U.S. territorial waters. Technically, they'd committed no act of war, but they'd locked fire control radar on American vessel. Closed aggressively, ignored warnings, created imminent threat under established ROE criteria. International rules of engagement permit defensive action against imminent threats, but shooting at Venezuelan warships, even defensively, risked major international incidents, potential casualties, diplomatic crisis, maybe war. The commander chose the middle option, authorized under ROE, demonstration of capability and resolve without direct attack. Warning shots fired into international waters ahead of hostile vessels. USS McFall's 5-inch deck gun traversed, not toward Venezuelan ships, toward water 500 yards ahead of lead Venezuelan vessel. 1 round fired, high explosive. Impact on water surface created massive plume, visible for miles. Unmistakable message. We can hit you anytime we want. This is your last chance to leave. The shot was perfectly calculated, close enough to demonstrate precision capability, far enough to avoid hitting anyone accidentally. Not an attack, a warning. Textbook execution of graduated response doctrine, but the implied threat was crystal clear. The next round goes through your hull, then your engines, then your bridge. You don't survive the next 60 seconds if you continue. Venezuelan ships immediately stopped advancing, held position, fire control radars disengaged. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. Standoff. Venezuelan commanders consulting with Caracas. Americans waiting for Venezuelan response. Then slowly, the Venezuelan ships turned, one by one, heading back toward Venezuelan territorial waters. Not emergency speed. Measured withdrawal. saving face while retreating. USS Macfall and USS Detroit maintained position, escorting Venezuelan ships visually until they crossed back into territorial waters, ensuring they actually left. Not following into Venezuelan territory, just making sure they were gone. The Coast Guard cutter resumed patrol. Mission complete. No casualties, no damage. No shots exchanged except one demonstration round. Perfect execution of controlled force under established rules of engagement. This scenario demonstrates everything right about U.S. Navy discipline and strategic thinking under rules of engagement. First, restraint. Venezuelan ships committed hostile acts. Fire control, radar lock in international waters is aggressive posture, justifying defensive response under ROE. The Navy could have legally engaged with direct fire, destroyed all 3 Venezuelan ships in minutes. But they didn't, because the strategic objective wasn't sinking Venezuelan vessels, it was protecting the Coast Guard cutter and demonstrating American resolve without escalation. Sinking Venezuelan warships would have created martyrs, given Maduro propaganda victory, American aggression against Venezuela, international condemnation, diplomatic complications. One warning shot achieved the objective without those costs. Second, overwhelming force positioning. The sudden appearance of 2 Navy warships changed the tactical situation instantly. Venezuelan commanders thought they had an advantage. Suddenly, they were outgunned and outmatched. That's not an accident, that's doctrine. The U.S. Navy positions warships in contested regions specifically for rapid response scenarios, ready to respond within minutes, creating overwhelming local superiority when needed. Third, clear communication following escalation protocols. USS Macfall's warnings were unambiguous. Specific separation requirements. Explicit consequences for non-compliance. No confusion about American intentions. Standard professional military communication. Fourth, precision demonstration. The warning shot showed capability without causing harm. 5-inch naval gun has range exceeding 13 miles, accuracy within meters. That round landed exactly where intended. Message received. Fifth, controlled escalation, matching threat level. Venezuelan ships used fire control radar. Americans responded with warning shots. Proportional, not excessive. Giving Venezuelans off-ramp to de-escalate. This is how professional militaries operate under rules of engagement. For Venezuela's military, this type of incident represents devastating embarrassment. Venezuelan Navy positions these confrontations as demonstrations of strength, standing up to American imperialism, defending sovereignty, patriotic resistance. Instead, when faced with overwhelming response, they retreat without achieving any objective, without firing a single weapon. That's not victory, that's humiliation. The truth becomes obvious. Venezuelan warships cannot face U.S. Navy vessels. Not even close. The capability gap is insurmountable. Venezuelan state media tries spinning these incidents, claims their ships successfully monitored American vessels and maintained Venezuelan sovereignty. But the military knows the reality. The psychological impact ripples through Venezuelan forces. Officers questioning whether confronting U.S. forces is remotely viable. Sailors wondering if their commander's bravado will get them killed for nothing. This creates lasting deterrent effect. Future Venezuelan naval operations become noticeably more cautious. They still patrol, still conduct operations, but they avoid American vessels. Maintain wide separation. No more aggressive approaches, no more fire control radar locks. This pattern has been documented in subsequent U.S.-Venezuela encounters. Venezuelan forces maintain greater distance, less aggressive posturing. The deterrent effect works. This scenario illustrates fundamental principles about modern naval power and strategic deterrence that apply across all confrontations. Military strength isn't just about how many ships you have or how big your guns are. It's about training, discipline, coordination, strategic positioning, ability to project overwhelming force exactly when and where needed. Regional powers like Venezuela can deploy multiple vessels to specific incidents, but superpowers maintain global logistics, intelligence networks, command and control architecture, ability to position assets based on predictive analysis. The difference between regional power and superpower isn't just scale, it's capability to shape the environment. Regional powers react to situations. Superpowers create situations, control the environment, dictate terms through superior positioning and coordination. Warning shots in scenarios like this aren't just about stopping vessels in one confrontation. They establish credibility for future encounters across entire regions. Every navy operating in contested waters watches. Cuban Navy, Russian vessels, Chinese ships on various missions. Everyone sees what happens when US Navy vessels are challenged. Message received universally. Don't challenge US Navy vessels unless prepared for overwhelming response. The reaction will be immediate, professional, and decisive. You won't win. You'll be humiliated. That's deterrence, not threatening everyone constantly, demonstrating capability and resolve in key moments, making the cost of confrontation obviously higher than any potential benefit, creating psychological deterrent effect lasting years. This is how professional military forces achieve strategic objectives through controlled application of force. Scenarios like the warning shot that stops aggressive warships represent perfect execution of strategic military thinking under modern rules of engagement. The objective isn't destruction. It's protection and deterrence. Protect friendly vessels. Deter future aggression through demonstration of overwhelming capability. Mission accomplished. No casualties, no damage, no diplomatic crisis. Just clear demonstration of capability, resolve, and professional discipline. Venezuelan vessels retreat. Future harassment incidents decrease significantly. Coast Guard and other American vessels continue operations without interference. One shot. Perfectly placed, perfectly timed, perfectly measured. That's not weakness. That's strength. The confidence to use minimum force necessary. The discipline to stop when objectives are achieved. The strategic wisdom to win without fighting. Adversaries learn what every challenger eventually learns. You don't challenge the US Navy unless you're prepared to lose. Badly, quickly, decisively. And most nations aren't prepared for that. If you want more stories about military strategy, tactical discipline, and how professionals handle crisis situations, hit that subscribe button for Battlescope. Don't forget to smash that like button and share this video with anyone interested in naval operations and strategic thinking. Drop a comment below. Was the warning shot the right call? Or should the Navy have been more aggressive? Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay informed, and remember, true strength is knowing when not to shoot.